Have you ever tried to move a full sheet of plywood around by yourself? Then you definitely know it can be a challenge, especially with some of these pieces weighing upwards of 70 pounds a piece. So I've done a bunch of research and I've come up with 5 ways to help you move plywood around your shop much easier. First up is a furniture dolly. This is a basic tool. You probably already have one of these at your home if you've ever moved before. They're great for moving heavy objects and they can be used for plywood. When you need to move plywood, just lift up one side, use your foot to slide the dolly underneath, and then set it back down. Now on flat surfaces, this makes the plywood easy to move around. But if you have any kind of a slope or a hill, it can be a little bit hard to control because all of the wheels are independent and can go in different directions and do not have any brakes on them. Another concern you might look out is the width. Because the dollies are so much wider than a piece of plywood, then you can easily bump other things and lose control. And sometimes they can be a little challenging to get over large cracks or bumps. And even with the downsides of using a furniture dolly, it is definitely better than trying to lift it up by yourself and potentially hurting your back. Next up is a 2-wheel dolly. This is homemade, but I've seen similar versions you can actually purchase online. This is made from some scrap 1x and 2x. It was whatever I had laying around. I have a 1-inch slot right there so I can have a single sheet of plywood go right there in the middle. And the wheels are actually off an old lawnmower, so that didn't cost me anything. I have a threaded rod going through everything and just hold it together with some washers and some nuts on the end, as you can see there. So let's go test this out. I walked the dolly up to about the center of the plywood and set it down. I then lifted up the plywood and it actually bumped the dolly and it started to move just a little bit. So I bumped it with my foot, lined it back up, and I was able to then set the plywood right down in the middle of the dolly, which worked out great. I then decided to roll it across my shop just a little bit. I have a nice little bump in my floor, and as I did, I barely even felt it at all. I then rolled it back into position, lifted the plywood off the dolly, and set it down on the ground with ease. Overall, this setup worked out great. Other than the initial setting the plywood into position, it rolled real well, and I didn't feel any kind of resistance going over bumps, and I'd love it. I'd strongly suggest one of these for you. Now, when I came across this third idea, I really was like, how in the world can a Frisbee help you move plywood? Then I got to thinking, wait a minute, this is very similar to furniture sliders. You know, the ones you put your big couches on and you can slide them across the floor real easily? Very similar concept. So let's go try this out. I then positioned the corner of the plywood along the lip of the Frisbee so there'd be very little chance of it actually coming off. I then started to push it across my floor, including over the little bump in my floor, and it went with ease. I didn't even feel the bump. I then positioned it back on the other side, slid it back into place, and lifted it up to see exactly how much wear and tear was on the Frisbee. And as you can see here, it has a few little scratches on it, but most of this was already here before I even put the plywood on it. It was pretty surprising exactly how little wear was on the Frisbee. I figured it'd be a lot more scratches in it. Now, as easy as this went across the concrete, I have a feeling if you're trying to get some plywood across some grass, maybe a field, this might work for you as well. Instead of trying to lift it yourself, put it on there and slide. It'd probably slide pretty easy on the grass. Now, going across gravel, well, it might bite into some of these grooves and actually pull it off, so I'd probably avoid that. But overall, Frisbee, that's a way to do it. Now, number 4 I actually found in an old wood magazine. It's very similar to the 2-wheel dolly, except this one is much, much taller. It actually has a groove down here, very similar to the 2-wheel, but on the top, it actually has a little flap that allows you to lay the plywood into position, and that kind of locks it into place so it won't fall. It also has a couple handles on the side here to make it a little bit easier. Let's go test it out. I rolled the dolly up to the plywood and it was real easy to position into place. The only downside was being able to lift the plywood high enough with just one hand. So you needed some strength in one arm just to do that. But otherwise, once you got it into position, I locked it and it was real easy to maneuver around. At one point I realized it wasn't centered, so I unlocked it, moved it over, and relocked it again, and that was really easy to do. I then attempted to try and lift it with the 2 handles, and it just wasn't really a good thing to do. It's just still way too heavy to do with these small little handles, but overall I was definitely impressed with its ability to stay straight up. I even walked away from it and this thing was self-standing. I didn't have to touch it at all and it stayed right in position. Now this is a nice little tool to have. I do love the ability of it being self-standing. You can walk away from the plywood, I mean of course as long as there's no big wind gusts going on, and it'll be self-standing. That was a nice little option. I loved how it just locked into place and just felt like it was a lot more solid. Now the handles on the side, the top one might be a good idea to help maneuver it into place, but the bottom one and trying to lift them from the handles, not a great idea. The magazine also had, I believe it was an eye screw in the middle to run to a pulley, I guess if you had a bad back. Not really for me, but I mean, I guess you could do that too. But overall, cool little tool to have in a shop. While I was working on the first 4, I was thinking, those are great in the shop, but what if you have to take something across your yard, maybe through your backyard, or you have to take something from your vehicle to your shop, and you have to go through some grass or some rough terrain? Well, those lawnmower tires, well, they could easily get stuck or just cause problems. So I decided to make another version of the 2-wheel with some upgraded tires. These are some pneumatic tires and wheels that you can buy real inexpensively. These can handle about 300 pounds a piece, so potentially 600 pounds. I hope you're not trying to move that much plywood, but you could. And I also decided to put some fenders around these, because just in case you're going through grass that might be a little bit damp, you don't want to sling that water up on your plywood or anything else you're carrying for that matter. So let's go test this outside. I first started by loading the plywood up onto the dolly, which took a little bit more effort than the normal 2-wheel because it's slightly higher for the fenders, but other than that, it worked out great. I then rolled it off the ledge of my concrete on my grass. There was a little bit of a bounce, but I kept full control. And then I decided to roll this all the way across my yard to my back building. Now the only upgrade I'd probably make to this setup is maybe put a little strip of rubber or maybe some sandpaper right here in the middle, because as I was pushing it across the yard, it did have a tendency to slide just a little bit. And as I was pushing it back to my main building, the tires hit the concrete ledge, which was probably about 1.5 inches to 2 inches tall, and it would not go over it. That is to be expected. I can't ask everything from this little tool. But in any case, it's a great little project. I hope you can make one. Now I hope you can use one of these tools to make moving plywood around your shop so much easier. And if you have any other ideas, please put those in the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out these.